You know that feeling when you hear something from a centuries-old religious text and it just doesn't quite sit right with your modern ideas about love and relationships? Well, today we're diving headfirst into that very feeling. We're talking about the deep divide in Islamic sexual ethics and this huge gap between historical laws and how so many Muslims live and think today. Yeah, it's a real struggle for a lot of people. I mean, how are you supposed to square today's ideas about, an equal partnership in marriage with legal traditions that were written for a totally different world? It feels impossible sometimes. And that's the exact question we're going to try and unpack here. So, to help us navigate this tricky subject, we've got a fantastic guide. We're diving into the really groundbreaking book, Sexual Ethics in Islam by the scholar Kecia Ali. Honestly, her work gives us the perfect map for making sense of this whole complex history. Okay, so what's the central argument of the book? Well, Ali has this perfect phrase for it, a profound dissonance. Think of it like this. It's that jarring, almost uncomfortable feeling you get when you read the logic of these old legal texts, and it just clashes with everything we intuitively believe is right today. Stuff like fairness, mutual consent, and what it means to be real partners in a relationship. All right, so to really understand this dissonance, we have to go way back. We need to look at the very foundation of the classical framework. And believe it or not, it all hinges on one single, powerful concept that shaped literally every rule about sex and marriage. And that keyword is milk. Now, in Arabic, milk means ownership, dominion, or control. And get this, in classical Islamic law, all permissible sex was based on a man possessing some form of milk. This right here is the absolute most important key to unlocking the entire classical system. Everything builds on this. So working from this idea of milk, the classical legal system said there were only two ways to have licit sex. The first was marriage, milk al-nikah, which was defined by the husband's control over the marriage contract. The second was slave concubinage, milk al-yamin, which was based on a master's literal ownership of a female slave. And here's the really crucial part. The law saw these two relationships as being fundamentally analogous. They were built on the same core logic. And that is just a wild insight, right? It means that whether you got married or you bought a slave, licit sex was always based on some form of male control or ownership. This wasn't just some abstract theory, you guys. This was the bedrock of family law for well over 1,000 years. It shaped everything. And you can see how this logic plays out in really concrete ways. Check out this quote from a 17th century jurist. He just lays it out flat. A free man can have 4 wives and as many concubines as he wants from his female slaves. To us, that sounds shocking. But in his world, this wasn't some crazy controversial statement. It was just a straightforward application of that core principle of ownership. Okay, so let's hit the fast forward button and jump to today. Because when we start talking about marriage and money now, well, that classical logic starts to feel like it's from a completely different planet. Let's take a perfect example. The dower, mahr. It's a really important part of any Muslim marriage contract today. But have you ever stopped to think about what its original purpose was in the classical legal system? The answer is, well, it's probably not what you think. The difference here is just jarring. Back then in classical law, the dower was seen as pretty straightforward compensation paid by the husband for exclusive sexual access. I mean, one famous jurist literally called it the vulva's price. So blunt. But today, we think of it as a romantic gift, a symbol of commitment, maybe a financial safety net for the wife. The meaning has been totally flipped on its head. And if you think that's a big shift, just listen to this. That same 17th century jurist we mentioned earlier, he wrote that if a man has 1,000 concubines and someone criticizes him for it, that criticism is basically like an act of unbelief. Why? Because in his view, the man is just using a right that God himself granted him through ownership. Just wow. And that right there is exactly what Kecia Ali means when she talks about a deep psychic distance. The whole moral universe where that statement made perfect sense, it's just so profoundly far away from the world most of us, including the vast majority of Muslims, live in today. All right, let's keep going because this same logic of ownership, it's also the key to understanding another really contentious topic, divorce. So let's talk about talaq. This is the traditional right of a husband to end a marriage just by saying, I divorce you. He doesn't need his wife's consent. He doesn't need to go before a judge. It's totally unilateral. But the big question is, why? Why did the husband have this exclusive power? And you guessed it, It all comes back to milk. Let's break down the classical logic. Step 1. The marriage contract gives the husband milk, that is, control over the marital tie itself. So, step 2. Talaq is just the husband unilaterally releasing that control. It's the exact same logic as a master unilaterally setting a slave free. And once you see that analogy, you can understand why trying to create an equal, egalitarian system of divorce from within this old framework is just so difficult. I mean, to put it as simply as possible, the person who owned the marital tie was the only one who could release it. And in this system, that person was the husband. That's the logic, plain and simple. Okay, so we've seen this profound dissonance. We've dug into the historical framework of milk. The big question now is, where do we go from here? How do you even begin to forge a new ethics? Well, according to Kecia Ali, here's the root of the problem. Modern Muslims have, for the most part, intuitively rejected this whole logic of ownership in their personal relationships. But, and this is a big but, that very same logic is still embedded in the classical legal rules that people are often told are timeless and unchanging. It's like the foundation of the house has crumbled, but we're still trying to live in some of the rooms. So let's wrap this up. What are the big takeaways here? First, the entire classical framework was built on this concept of milk, of ownership. Second, our modern values, things we hold dear like consent, reciprocity, partnership, are in direct tension with that old framework. Third, if we ignore this history, it's no wonder our modern debates get so confusing and reform feels impossible. And finally, and maybe most importantly, if we want to build a new, relevant ethics, we have to start by engaging honestly with this past. And that's really the path forward that Ali suggests. It's not about just throwing the entire tradition away. It's about constructive and critical engagement. It means really understanding the past, even the parts that make us uncomfortable, because that's the only way we can build something new, something ethically vibrant for today and for the future. And that really leaves us all with a final big question to chew on. And it's not just about Islam, it applies to any tradition. What does it really take to look honestly at a complex, difficult past in order to build an ethics that actually speaks to the world we live in now and can truly serve the future?